And thank you also to the Irish Coach Kids Project, the presenters, the partners, and the wider family who are tuning in today. There's certainly a feel in the chat and within what we're hearing about new strategies and a new approach are coming. And I think for coaches, we're being challenged outside our comfort zones. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Professor Catherine Woods. Catherine is going to speak about youth sport dropout. Catherine is based at the University of Limerick at the Department of Physical Education and Sports Science, and she's also a member of their Health Study Institute. Catherine believes that physical activity is a best buy in terms of public health, and she enjoys developing and testing theoretically interventions to test this belief. Her ultimate goal is to find better methods of bringing research, practice closer together to achieve a sustainable impact to address the inactivity pandemic. So Catherine will speak on youth sport dropout. Prevention is better than cure. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Declan. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, and thank you to iCoach Kids for another wonderful conference, and to Sergio and the team for bringing this all together. It's great to see so many people giving up time to attend this, and great presentations thus far. If I may, I'm just going to share my screen if that is okay. And can people see my screen? You can just let me know.
We certainly can.
Okay, great. Thank you, Gary. Thank you for that. So some very interesting conversations already, and some of the notes that I've been taking down include things like that phrase, caretaker of dreams, really nice. A really big challenge to Stacey Edmonds and her team in terms of data harmonization, but much needed. So brilliant to see that starting off, and best of luck with it. And of course, that wonderful presentation there by the last speaker in terms of football being the conduit to life skills, to fundamental movement skills, and to providing young children with the ownership for their own sport involvement, physical activity, and health literacy. So some excellent presentations. And today I'm going to touch on dropout, youth sport dropout, with the philosophy that prevention is better than cure. So that's just a scene from the University of Limerick, and that's the layout of what I'm going to be covering today. So I'm not going to spend too much time on these statistics, but we know from a lot of data that when children hit 13 or 14, you can see here the Gaelic Athletic Association data from Ireland. You can see here some swimming data from the Netherlands, but we know quite comprehensively now that by the age of 13, 14, there is a real problem with dropout from structured sport among both boys and girls. So first message, dropout from sport is a challenge that needs to be solved. But what would happen if we could track children's participation over time? And Stacey has already alluded to this and how challenging it is. And this is the results of a small study. You can see both papers represented at the bottom of the screen. A small study we did in Ireland where we managed to track over 800 children over a 5-year period. And we looked at their sport participation levels and how these changed. These are the results of the boys. So we had 265 boys, and in 2009, the top 10 sports that these boys were participating in are listed on your screen here. You can see, for example, that 41% of the sample were playing soccer, 39% Gaelic football, and so on, all the way down to martial arts. 5 years later, go back to those same children, ask them the exact same question, and this was the answer that we got. So you can see that in soccer, there was a dropout, a statistically significant dropout. Gaelic football is looking pretty consistent. Hurling, there was a dropout, and so on and so forth. So by looking at these children at 2 different time points, we can see changes in their pattern of behavior. But what if we were to track the children and see what happens to each child? Well, it becomes slightly different. In terms of the difference here, looking at 2009 in comparison to 2014 is 8%, 1%, 8%, and so on. But let's track the children. Within that, in actual fact, in 2014, 18% of this number had dropped out, 11% from Gaelic football. And at the same time, in 2014, a number of children had joined the sport, and I refer to that as drop-in. So you had a significant movement, and this goes right across all of the different activities. And the orange bars are where the difference, if you just look at the two raw data here, you would estimate 1% difference. But in actual fact, 11% of children over the 5 years had dropped out, while 10% had taken up the sport. And if you look at that in graphic form, and I can only put 4 on the figure for clarity. The 2009 data says out of these 265 boys, this was the participation rates in these sports. By 2014, these same boys had changed and the participations had dropped, but not massively. However, in 2014, we know that 18% of those participating in 2009 had left soccer, 11% had left Gaelic football, 11% had left swimming, and 9% had left rugby. Whereas new children had come into the sport in 2014. And remember, these new children will have very different skill sets. They may be joining the sport for very different reasons than the younger children would have been doing 5 years previous. If we look at girls, and we had over 600 girls that we managed to track, you can see the top 10 sports that they were engaging in. In 2009, these are the proportions. And if you compare those exact same children 5 years later, how did the proportions change? Well, similar to the boys, there were decreases. But again, similar to the boys, the differences were not massive. And when you track the children, what you see is that specific children had dropped out quite a lot. So out of 29%, 16% of children were no longer in dance. 18% were no longer in swimming. 10% were no longer in Gaelic football. But by 2014, new children had joined these activities. Again, graphically, 2009 data, compare it cross-sectionally to 2014. This is the picture that you will get, but dig into that data, track your children, and the movement is much more substantial in terms of dropout and drop-in. So the second message, dropout does not have to mean stop. And this is a really important message to all of the wonderful coaches and the volunteer coaches, professional coaches that are involved in this area. Sport-specific dropout does not have to lead to sport general dropout. In other words, if children are moving out of your sport, if we can get them pathways into other sports, other activities, and keep them within the sport family, then that is a really big success. And as you've seen from my data, that drop-in is quite a powerful behavior that we need to really study, as well as dropout in this age group. And this is something that we touched on with a project called Keep Youngsters Involved. And this was funded by the European Council under their Erasmus Sport programme. We had 3 aims on keeping youngsters involved. And the aims were, 1, we wanted to identify factors influencing dropout. 2, develop a framework that would help us those factors, and then create a practical toolkit for in relation to addressing this concept. Our definition of sports dropout was that it was the prolonged absence of systematic practice and competition, either in one sport, that's sport-specific dropout, or in all sports, which is sport general dropout. And what we found was that there were 144 factors identified in the scientific literature. 39 of those were significantly related to dropout, and 14 of them specifically related to prevention of dropout. These are the 14 factors. And I don't really have a lot of time to go through these today in detail, but I am going to direct you to this website here at the bottom of my screen, www.keepyoungstersinvolved.eu. You can download all of the information on the factors, including our full toolkit in relation to the prevention of dropout. What I do want to share with you is that if these factors are present in your club, then they will lead to, or there is more likelihood that they will increase intrinsic motivation, enjoyment, they will improve the social support, they will have a positive environmental support, positive goal orientation, and positive attitude. And these are outcomes that result in prevention of dropout. The other thing I want you to take away is that these factors do not focus at an individual level down here at the bottom, which would be specifically at the child in isolation, but they are a combination through intrapersonal, through the organization or institution, which could be school-related factors, for example, the community where the clubs are generally based, right up to policy. National and regional sport policy can influence the prevention of dropout from sport for children and young people. So how did we Keep Youngsters Involved understand those factors? Well, when we were looking at it, we were informed by Gregory Welk's work on the youth physical activity promotion model. And basically what we saw was, that if you take a child and you have their personal demographics, their age, gender, and so on, and what you're trying to do is understand, how do we prevent dropout from sport from these individuals? Oh, sorry, backwards. Well, the first thing, or the first concept, is that there are certain predisposing factors. In other words, a child will say, one of the key things that help a child to decide whether they're going to drop out or not are two questions. Am I able for this sport? And is it worth it? And when they combine, they generate something called predisposing disposition towards the engagement in the sport that will lead to dropout. But also aligned to the predisposing factors and influencing them is something called enabling concepts or factors. And these are factors that are internal to the sports club, but also external to the sports club. For example, the school and school-related factors may be very important here. And on the other side, reinforcing factors. And this are factors to do with the child's parents, the child's peers, and obviously the coach and the child. So in order to prevent youth sports dropout, there are three core concepts: predisposing factors, enabling factors, and reinforcing factors. And under each of those factors, the 14 factors we had identified fit. How does this work? Well, under predisposing, there are factors 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8 fit out of the 14. These are autonomy, perceived competence, relatedness, expectancies, and values. And within the Keeping Youngsters Involved toolkit, each of these factors has a statement, a good practice statement. Let me give you an example. If we take autonomy, then the good practice statement for a club that has autonomy would be that every youngster who's a part of that club should experience a certain freedom of choice in his or her actions, thinking, and feelings related to his or her sports practice. Every youngster can take the initiative and should experience their behavior as self-organized. In other words, they have a certain level of control and a certain level of choice in relation to the activities they do. That's the good practice we'd like to see in the sports club. But what does that mean in concrete terms? What are the actions that help lead to that? So we went to a whole range of sports clubs across Europe and we asked them to translate that into what they do, or give us ideas about what they do that could meet an autonomy supportive environment. And we generated these actions. So under the factor called autonomy, this is targeted at coaches and trainers. And this is the action that a coach and trainer could adopt to generate an autonomy supportive environment. That is, for example, ask the youngster about how his or her perfect season would look like and support him or her in achieving it. Equally, there is an autonomy action for the club. Create a youth committee to participate in club decisions. Sharing leadership and decision making with youngsters is sharing on the rewards of sport. And if these actions are in place, the autonomy supportive environment is more likely to be in place, and prevention of dropout under the predisposing factor is more likely to happen. In terms of relatedness, we have the good practice statement, and again, the examples of actions for the club or the coaches. In terms of the reinforcing factors, these are coach-athlete relationship, peer involvement, and parental autonomy support. And again, a good practice statement here would be that every youngster and coach equally should have a positive, should have an effective and positive relationship, which includes empathetic understanding, honesty, support, cooperation, and respect. And these are some of the actions that our grassroots clubs told us that they do with their coaches and trainers to generate this coach-athlete relationship, and some of the actions that clubs do to generate the coach-athlete relationship. In terms of the enabling factors, there are 6: a learning climate, time goal balance, cost, prevention policy, accessibility, and type of sport offer. And again, an example of time goal balance, quite a lengthy one. But basically, it's really about trying to get children to understand the skills of time management and enabling that to happen as part of the teaching of your club. And here again is an action that a coach or a trainer can do, and an action that a club could do. For example, organising sports classes at specific times of the days, or if possible, having dinner or homework sessions within the club to really look after the holistic needs of the child. So the toolkit, and this is available to download from the website that I identified earlier, is for professionals and volunteers who work with youngsters in sport at grassroots level, trainers, teachers, and so on. There are 14 factors that we've identified from the literature to prevent sport dropout. There are movies. And what we've done with these cards that I've shown you, all of these cards here, is we've turned them into a card game. And this helps us generate an environment where we can have a conversation with our coaches and a conversation with our athletes and our players and our participants in relation to youth sports dropout. So by playing this game, there are 126 different cards that represent all of the different factors. They come in this black box here. You put them out on a table. People pick the ones that are really important to them for prevention of dropout. You share them with your table. And then as a group, you identify the ones that are really important for your club. So it is a mechanism of having a conversation, identifying strategies that would work bespoke to your club, and then putting them in action. So take-home messages. So first of all, there is considerable drop in and drop out of sport over the adolescent transition periods. Cross-sectional data alone is insufficient, and we need more longitudinal data to really understand this serious challenge. Top reasons for dropout challenge how youth sport is offered to adolescents and school leavers. Work study commitments, lack of interest, taking up too much time, and expenses were common factors that we found. And the KYI Toolkit provides a useful resource to get a conversation going between the club, the coaches, the volunteers, and importantly, the children themselves, to find out ways bespoke to their needs to prevent youth sport dropout. I'd like to acknowledge the partners on KYI for participating in this research study, and thank you very much.
Catherine, thank you ever so much. Your timekeeping is impeccable. We're just finishing on time. There are lots of questions in the Q&A, which I might ask you to address afterwards. They're around sharing studies and questions about the pathways children took, including whether the research asked the children why they dropped out. So that was very good, and you might, as I say, you might answer those in the questions and answers. The keeping youngsters involved material are very, very useful. And the one thing I would say to all our listeners is that while we have evidence bases, the children you coach will have their own voice. And if you ask them why they're in and out, it'll be massively helpful to you in your coaching, that you can help, the earlier speaker said, serve their needs. So thanks very much, Catherine.